In the past, we believed that problems came from the external environment, that problems arose according to our surroundings. But this perspective changed when Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, saw that life depends much more on our mind than on our surroundings. If a slave could be happy, why can't we who are free? Just like plants, people also develop. Some thrive in the light, while others grow in the shade. There are those who benefit more from the shadow than from the light. The shadow is something that happens in our mind. It's the result of all our thoughts, desires, wishes, and abilities that have been repressed or put aside throughout life. We end up being influenced by the people around us. They impose ideas on us about what is right, wrong, pleasant, unpleasant, good or bad, and pressure us to maintain only behaviors that are considered acceptable. So the way we are and act is influenced to fit in with this big group called the world. However, it's not just our lesser-known impulses that are hidden by society. Social structures such as family, friends, school, and work also make us hide special and unique parts of who we are, just because they don't fit in with what is considered right. Who hasn't had the feeling that a part of themselves, a part full of emotion, originality, and purpose, has simply disappeared over time? We human beings are like bags of blood and bones, not so different from other animals. The only thing that makes us special is our ability to strive to reach our potential. We have the ability to transform our lives into a true work of art. And if we're lucky in the end, we can look back without too many regrets. And then, what prevents us from reaching our full potential is exactly the shadow, that hidden part of our mind. So the shadow is the side of our personality that we keep hidden from the world and even from ourselves. These are thoughts, feelings, and desires that we prefer not to reveal to anyone. As much as we want to evolve as much as possible, none of us is as perfect or as elevated as we'd like to think. We all have instinctive impulses, desires for pleasure, power, and other things that go against what society considers right. So much so that Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, always had a servant saying in his ear, "You're just a man." This reinforced that, although he was a powerful human being with wealth, desire, and fame, he was still just a man. And we all have a dark side, an aggressive part, a cruel side that can cause great harm to other people, a part that is very different from the person we believe ourselves to be. We always try to deny our faults, our weaknesses, and our thoughts. The problem arises when we ask ourselves, okay, but where do these things go? Psychologist Carl Jung, a disciple of Freud, believed that these parts don't disappear, but rather hide in the unconscious and join what he called the shadow. Within each of us, there are impulses, desires, emotions, and characteristics that don't match the image we consciously have of ourselves, what Jung called the persona. It's like the mask we wear every day to relate to the world, the person we show to others. Due to the rules and values of the culture we live in, these issues are often not accepted or integrated. They are pushed into the subconscious, continuing to exert a great influence on our lives, often in a negative and disturbing way. This can lead us to make automatic decisions, to live on autopilot, without realizing that we are sinking, without understanding why this is happening. I believe that this shadow that Jung explains is one of the reasons why Avidius Cassius betrayed Marcus Aurelius. When it was rumored that the emperor was about to die, an urge, a shadow took over his interior with the effervescent desire that instead of being the man closest to the most powerful man in the world, he wanted to be the most powerful man in the world. Look, Jung thought that people's minds are like a jigsaw puzzle with many pieces, and these pieces need to be organized and put together. He thought that the shadow, an important part of our personality, is one of these essential pieces that needs to be recognized. Jung was a very intelligent psychologist who began his career following Freud's teachings at the beginning of the 20th century. Although they started out as friends and worked together for a while, Jung developed different ideas from Freud. Their friendship became strained, and in 1913 they broke up for good, mainly because of disagreements, including Jung's book called Symbols of Transformation. This book deepened the differences between them and contributed to their separation. This is yet another example of a change in human will, of desire being strong and getting in the way of relationships, and even breaking them. Seneca was a faithful advisor to Nero for years, even in his darkest and most dubious times. Seneca spared no effort to help the emperor, but even so, Nero's shadow caused him to kill Seneca. With all his studies over the years, Jung had a unique way of seeing how the human mind works. He came up with some very interesting ideas to help us better understand how we think and feel. It's important to understand that these ideas are kind of like stories or images that help us understand, okay? The brain isn't divided exactly like that. But Jung divided the mind into 4 parts, as if they were pieces. The conscious, which is what we're thinking and feeling now. The collective, unconscious, which is a very deep part that everyone shares, full of things that are important to all cultures, such as symbols and images. The personal unconscious, which is where things we've forgotten or hidden are kept, such as memories and thoughts that we don't remember now. And the shadow, it's like a hidden part at the back of our minds, where we keep things we'd rather not remember. The shadow isn't just made up of bad things, and that's what makes it cool. In fact, the shadow also has good things that have been kind of forgotten or put aside. Accepting and understanding the shadow doesn't mean liking what is considered bad, but rather accepting all parts of ourselves, knowing that people are complicated and have different sides. This is amor fati itself, accepting fate, loving it, and crying out for it. No matter what happens, you accept it, because although it may seem good or bad, things just are. The shadow is like a hidden, lesser-known part of ourselves. It can have good or bad things in it. Exploring the shadow is like going on a journey to discover more about who we really are. The shadow only gets bad when we ignore it. If we don't use a flashlight to see what's there, we won't be able to understand a large part of who we are, and that can make us feel a bit lost. Seneca once said, "We suffer more in the imagination than in reality." This proves that this denial, or the failure to see our shadow, is what will cause our consciousness to come up with more problems every day, leaving us feeling more and more idle. Let's use an example. Imagine someone who thinks that having money is a bad thing, that only bad people have money, that only people who do wrong things or cheat others get rich. This person, because they don't really face this thought, understand why they think this way, because they are too afraid of something hidden in their shadow, ends up facing problems and doing things automatically in their life without even realizing it. They may struggle to get a good job, get the position they want, build the life they want, earn the money they want, all because of this shadow inside them. As Marcus Aurelius warned us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. The problem is that many of us don't have this power. We let the shadow take over our mind and prevent us from thinking clearly. In other words, we no longer control the only thing we have control over, our mind. However, there is no light without shadow, no wholeness without imperfection. This is something we often forget, especially with social media these days, where everyone seems perfect and complete. But it's important to know that everyone has flaws and makes mistakes that they don't show. In addition, there is also a collective shadow, which is one of the things that feeds the growth of our own shadow, representing lesser-known aspects of a society. So, a collective shadow emerges at times of war, for example. We're seeing this happen now, or in moments of political division, when there's side A and side B, and people are choosing which of the two teams they're going to support, and so on. We can see that people's shadows reveal themselves in these external moments, in these more, shall we say, social moments. For a shadow to be seen, something has to block the path of light, right? And that something in our lives is what we call the persona. So, persona in Latin means mask or character, and in Jung's psychology, it represents a figurative mask that we wear in our interactions with other human beings. The part of us that other people know. It would be the collection of characteristics and behaviors that we want others to believe define us completely. Jung says that a mask, on the one hand, creates an expected impression and on the other, hides one's true nature. The construction of the persona begins early in life, as we learn which parts of our personality are approved by our family, friends, and society in general, and which are rejected. The approved traits are added to our persona, while the rejected ones are hidden in the mask. To make it clearer, think about how you talk about something with other people and compare it to how you talk to yourself when you're alone. Over time, to avoid feeling like we're being fake, we start to identify with the persona. In the process, we end up hiding character traits we don't like, both from others and from ourselves. These repressed traits form the shadow, which is the least visible part of our personality, made up of all the psychic elements that, due to their incompatibility with the conscious attitude chosen by the persona, are denied expression in life. This results in a fragmented, relatively independent personality with opposing tendencies. In other words, the repressed contents do not lie dormant in the unconscious. They operate independently, even if they are not at the center of our perception. It's as if there were another personality inside us acting on its own, and we often don't even realize it because we choose to repress these aspects. These elements begin to influence our lives, impacting our mood and behavior, and creating a tension between the personality we consciously show and the shadow personality. In moments of stress, conflict, or when we consume alcohol, for example, our mind can no longer keep these elements repressed in the unconscious. This is when the shadow reveals itself, often with significant consequences. It works like a spring. The stronger the repression, the more intense the force of expression. And this is exactly where Stoicism comes in. Despite appearing to be a philosophy that wants us to be emotionless, it is the opposite of that. It shows that we must feel, but more importantly, we must understand it and then control it. This is the key to serenity, because without this control that human beings are capable of, that's when they make horrible decisions, such as robberies, kidnappings, assaults, and many others based on emotions. Another way in which the shadow shows itself is through projection, something quite common and interesting when we perceive in other people, groups, or even other nations, weaknesses and defects that are actually within us. You know that moment when we say, "Wow, what a strange attitude from that person." This is actually a projection of what we consider to be bad or weak within ourselves. We attribute to the other person all the negative and inferior qualities that we don't want to admit in ourselves, feeling the need to criticize and attack that person when in fact, what happens is that a less developed part of us perceives something similar in the other person. Instead of denying this dark part of our personality, we need to illuminate it, to reconcile ourselves with our shadows. The shadow contains much more than just the negative side, our faults, our weaknesses. It's also where our strengths, our character, our personality, which have been repressed, can be found. For example, in a bad upbringing, when the teacher told you to shut up or kicked you out of class or whatever, your parents repressed a specific attitude of yours in an attempt to adapt to a society that is also sick, that is ready to welcome anyone, and we stop being who we really are because of this pressure exerted by the environment. As James Clear showed in his book Atomic Habits, it's easier to change a person's habits by changing their environment than through willpower. When we let the environment influence us involuntarily, we end up losing our uniqueness, our enthusiasm for life, and having to maintain a mask is difficult for anyone. Sometimes I realize that in places I'm not used to, I need to wear a specific mask, and that's normal. It's not about being fake, it's about adapting. It makes you more tired, more exhausted. Imagine having to do that all your life. To take advantage of the positive side of the shadow, to use it to our advantage, it's more than just observing what's there. We need to consciously integrate the elements of the shadow into our character and personality, allowing them to manifest in our daily lives. Even this attitude will create what Jung called a character that tends towards the ideal of healthy wholeness. He believes that, as we get closer to this state, we become better, more attractive to other people too. Everyone is wary of people who seem too good to be true, but much more interesting than being perfect is having a complete character. The whole person who knows not only their strengths, virtues, and potential for good, but also their weaknesses, flaws, and potential for evil. Those who believe they have only one side are mistaken. And one of the many benefits of knowing this dark side is that it creates a greater contrast, allowing the good in our character to stand out more easily. Or as Jung described it, when we confront the shadow, we can suddenly see both sides. We become aware not only of our moral inferiorities, but also more aware of our good qualities. Integrating all this allows us to no longer be controlled by anger, by selfishness, by greed, by aggression, by obsession. In short, it gives us the opportunity to exercise a certain amount of control over these things. That's what the Stoics enlightened us on. According to them, we don't have an action and a reaction, but rather an action, a perspective on that action, and only then a reaction. Remember the way of seeing things I mentioned earlier. An interesting way to start understanding our shadow better is to use it to our advantage. It's identifying characteristics in other people that cause us some kind of emotional reaction, such as disgust or anger, for example. This is usually a sign that the same characteristic is present within us. It's also useful to try to notice this in people close to us, which is usually easier than looking at ourselves. Yes, even if the shadow is something hidden in the unconscious, something personal, many of the elements deposited there end up emerging, being influenced by triggers in the environment. You can clearly see what each person's shadow is, or what elements of the shadow might be inside you. Another positive thing about the shadow is some instinctive impulses that we all have, such as desires for rivalry, power, and pleasure. At some points in life, it's understandable to repress these impulses, but we need to admit and accept these emotions. They have a great deal of energy. When we become aware of them, we can better control these impulses and use them to motivate us to take necessary risks in pursuit of a life worth living. And although it existed around 2,000 years ago, this is exactly what Stoic philosophy excels at. between differentiating between what we can control and what we cannot. The shadow is part of the whole person. Even a strong person has moments of weakness, and someone who is intelligent can also have moments of stupidity. Otherwise, the person seems too good to be true. We've heard that women often like a strong man's weaknesses more than his strength, and an intelligent man's stupidity more than his intelligence. True love wants to accept the whole person. I have a challenge for all of us, something I face myself. It's the idea of facing our shadow, of accepting our mistakes, or perhaps our good qualities that we put aside for fear of judgment, for fear of what others will think of our originality. When we explore this hidden side, I believe we have the chance to help heal a world that is sick. Many people see problems in everything and everyone, but fail to realize that the most serious problem lies within themselves. They don't understand that they are like characters divided in two, and only by facing this dark side can they become integral, discovering who they are beyond the social mask. By facing our shadow, we begin to understand that everything wrong we see in the world is also inside us, inside every human being. The more we avoid our shadow, the stronger it becomes, and it can explode at some unconscious moment in our lives. This isn't something that happens overnight. It's a continuous job throughout your life, being aware of all those little things we mentioned. It's a lifelong process. If we manage to integrate these aspects over time, we can keep an eye on them and use them to our advantage. Usually the people we admire are those who are at peace with their shadow, and this is something we can all apply in our lives. Remember what Marcus Aurelius asked us to hear: you're just a man. So even though the shadow haunts you, you know what it is and how it affects you. But if you're not sure whether you feel it, just look at some of the feelings you have. Do you have anxiety, depression, or even existential crises? These are feelings brought on by your shadow, bringing you insecurity and fear. But the Stoics didn't let it shake them. So I made a video to show you how to deal with the shadow. Click on the first comment and see right now how to master these fears.